ChristianGeekCentral.com.
Hi, I'm Peter Franson from ChristianGeekCentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again? Not really. But this is my second time recording this because I had some audio problems the first time. Oh my gosh! But I want to talk about AD, The Bible Continues. I want to say thank you to Matt McKinney for pointing me to this series, which I thought was going to be just some Talking Heads 1 hour special or something. But this is going to be like a TV series, I guess. I'm not sure how long it's going to last, but some really interesting stuff to talk about here. Now, first I should say that, normally I don't review this kind of stuff. I justified reviewing this because potentially when you're dealing with the supernatural, it does have some geek appeal. That's why I reviewed, say, Left Behind, but I'm not reviewing other, Christian movies or something like that. I don't review just movies in general. I like to review movies that specifically are targeted at geeks or that have some level of geek appeal. And I think that the story of the resurrection and the events of the New Testament, certainly with their supernatural elements, can have some cool geek appeal. So, although I should say that probably beyond today, I'm probably not going to be discussing this series a lot more, just because the geek appeal, I think, is a bit thin. But I do want to talk about this pilot here. Now, first, this isn't going to be like a normal review, but I do want to touch on just, what I do think about some of the aspects that I would normally talk about in review, like the story. The story starts in the middle of Jesus' trial and carries through to the kickoff of his resurrection, and basically deals with what his followers are experiencing, thinking about, fearing, hoping during that time period. The performances are really solid. They got, for TV anyway, they got really solid actors in all of the main roles. I don't have any complaints there. I can always complain, but I think for a TV show, I don't have legitimate reason to complain. The costumes and sets all look nice, again, for a TV show. When TV shows try to cover these types of time periods, things always look a little bit too clean and not lived in enough for me. I would love it if they had time to really texture the sets and the costumes so it really feels a little bit more real and lived in. But for a TV show, I think they do a really great job. The music is interesting. They do a mix of orchestral stuff and a little bit of like rock flavors here and there. I would have liked something a little bit more Middle Eastern to kind of convey the ethnic and historical sense of the story, although I don't think the ethnicity is really a high value for them in this show. I'll get to that a little bit later. And the visual effects and the makeup and stuff like that, I thought it all looked really nice, served its purpose well for a TV show. There's a cool part where an angel shows up, and the effects that are accompanying that, they look really cool. So it presents itself really well in that scene. Anyway, so let's get on to like the content, the things that people are probably mostly going to be talking about when it comes to this pilot and probably the rest of this series, and that is its fidelity to the source material. Now, I think that you can really analyze and get into the historical trivia aspects, and I think that's a worthwhile exercise, but it's not really something that interests me. When it comes to movies like this, or shows like this, or movies like the Noah movie or Exodus, Gods and Kings, I'm more interested about a few key message factors than I am the historical tidbits of who, what, when, and where. I care more about how God is represented and how the human condition is represented. And so that's mainly what I'm going to be focusing kind of my thoughts on as I compare this presentation of the story to the source material. So first I'll talk about what I would call maybe the Christian influence. I have no idea, but just the impression I got, and I'm completely ignorant here, the impression I got is that this is largely made by people who wanted to create something that was targeted at the Christian demographic, but maybe themselves aren't super invested in this, or don't take it as their own faith and something that they really believe in. But that maybe there are also some Christians, one or two, involved in the writing process. Because there's these little blips on the radar, I think, oh man, that's interesting. That's something that strikes me like as something that like only a Christian would really care to include and make a point of putting in there. So that's what I would call, I guess, the Christian influence that I see. Who knows what the real cause is? But the first thing I noticed is, what is truth? And that's a phrase that starts out the pilot and remains kind of a bit of an idea that's returned to over the course of the pilot. Of course, Pontius Pilate says that to Jesus when Jesus said that he came to represent the truth and that all that are on the side of truth listen to him. And Pilate says, what is truth? And I love the way that the actor handled that. I've seen a few different actors handle that phrase, and I love the way that he handled it, with just this kind of like perplexed, mystified, what am I supposed to do in this situation, and what does that really mean, I think it's such a relevant question today in modern pop spiritual America, where we really don't value truth as a whole. We in broad strokes, Americans are not interested in truth. We all just want to believe what we want to believe and let each other believe what they want to believe, and kind of somehow everybody's right. But really, if we're going to value truth, then we really can't conclude that everyone's right, and there has to be a single truth, and of course there can be multiple. No, I'm not going to go into that. But truth does not contradict itself. Truth is absolute by its very nature as a representation of that which is real, what is really real. So, so anyway, I thought it was interesting this idea of truth being come back to several times. And then the second thing I noticed was that the curtain or the veil in the temple was torn, and this was very briefly shown. I'm not sure if they actually were showing what was supposed to be the inner curtain, but that's the one that's being referred to in the New Testament accounts that talk about this. At the climax of Jesus' crucifixion, the temple veil is torn in two, and this was the veil that separated the priests and common people, of course, from the most holy place in the temple, which represented God's dwelling among his people, his presence among his people. And only one guy, the high priest, could go in there one time a year, and even then he had to bring a sacrifice with him. And so it was just kind of a constant reminder of this separation that we have from God because of our sin, and a separation that's necessary if we're going to say that God is a holy, just, and perfect God. A holy, just, and perfect God wouldn't just kind of shrug his shoulders at our selfishness and our evil, and just say, well, what are you going to do? I guess I'll just let them keep hurting each other and themselves. And, I mean, that we can't do that and still have a picture of a holy, perfect God intact. So there's this separation. That's what the whole sacrificial system of the Old Covenant was pointing to, and but it all became obsolete because of Jesus' sacrifice, which was of infinite worth because he himself is God and offered up his life as a sacrifice to pay for all of the sins of the world, so that all who believe in him can have his record of righteousness placed over their own and have access to God and not have this barrier of sin, hanging over them and disrupting any potential relationship that they might have with God. So that was huge. I mean, I'm wondering if maybe like the producers, or they just kind of included that, like, oh, that's cool and weird, that's kind of neat and supernatural. Let's throw that in there, and people just wonder and say, ooh, that's mysterious, because they're postmodern and they like mysterious things that don't make sense, But so maybe that's why it got in there. But it has really huge significance in terms of what Jesus' purpose was in coming to the world and dying, Number 3, I noticed that the swoon theory is debunked. This is an old theory that really isn't taken seriously among scholars anymore, but as far as I know, but is still kind of like this idea floating out there that people might subscribe to. It's the idea that Jesus just kind of got hurt really bad, but didn't really quite die. He just maybe stopped breathing for a while, or just really, really was almost dead. And then he kind of woke up and started feeling better, and somehow pushed away the stone, it's a weird theory. It doesn't make any sense. It completely, which is why it's really not considered serious among scholars anymore. But they took pains in a scene with Pontius Pilate talking to the Roman officer Cornelius, who was in charge of making sure that Jesus was dead. They took pains to go through the gory details and Cornelius was like, yeah, I mean, you're mad or you're a fool at this point if you would tell me that Jesus did not die. He's dead. So that was interesting. The fourth thing I noticed was that the Isaiah prophecy from chapter 53 of the book of Isaiah was mentioned in here, at least a part of it. Verse 9, which says, "And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death." And this whole chapter is about the Messiah. And the idea that, here is that he died among the wicked, and then in his death after that was with the wealthy, was with a rich man, because he ended up in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, which Joseph was a wealthy man, and Jesus died. He entered the grave with wicked men on each side of him, a robber and a thief and a murderer. And the fifth thing I noticed is that the Pharisees / Caiaphas understood Jesus' claim to resurrection. They understood that he was claiming that he was going to rise from death. And they even thought that his disciples would catch on to that. So it was fairly, they understood clearly that Jesus was predicting his own resurrection. Matthew 27:62-64 in the ESV says, "The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, 'Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, after 3 days I will rise. Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people he has risen from the dead, and the last fraud will be worse than the first.'" So I think that was a worthwhile detail to include, and a bit of an irony that the priests, that Caiaphas understood that Jesus was claiming that he was going to rise from the dead, but the disciples didn't. And I'll come back to that in a second as we now get into my thoughts on what I think were maybe the Hollywood, for lack of a better phrase, Hollywood influence on the movie. I really don't know what motivated some of these things that I'm going to talk about now. I don't think there's anything malicious involved. I think it was just kind of this strange ignorance, or I don't know what it was. It's just kind of weird. But it does, these changes, I think, do potentially change the message of the Bible as they represent it in this story. The first thing is, we have a handsome and charismatic Jesus, and they've been doing this for years in movies about Jesus. You're casting an actor, and actors that have the experience to take on a role like this usually got their first gigs because they're handsome. So, or at least that plays a major role, is what I mean to say. So anyway, it's kind of hard to avoid, a handsome Jesus. I kind of get that. And I think they probably want to pay respects and not be offensive, not offend Christians. But I mean, really, if we look at Isaiah 53, because the New Testament doesn't really give physical descriptions of Jesus, but Isaiah 53 verse 2, which they validate as a prophecy about the Messiah in this series, it says, "He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and had no beauty that we should desire him." So anyway, I think that's a worthwhile point to make, that Jesus came in this humble form, that he didn't come as this attractive, necessarily charismatic person. In fact, the New Testament doesn't really describe him as charismatic. It just describes people being blown away by his teaching, by the content, by the truth that he was giving people. Second thing I noticed, man, the offbeat ethnic casting in this series. Man, there's a whole lot of white people in this show, and two random, what seemed to me like we got to check the box and put some black people in this thing too. There's mysteriously few Middle Eastern people, and few to none in the key roles. Really weird to me. I saw there was some people that definitely had a Middle Eastern look to them in these kind of like side peripheral roles, and I said to my wife, I was like, well, man, they should be playing Peter and John. What is going on with the casting here? And I had just come off of watching The Passion a few days ago for the first time in years, and so it left a strong impression on me. And I know that nobody except for a few people would be interested in watching a show like this in subtitles. I would at least have liked some kind of Middle Eastern accents. I would have loved to have Middle Eastern actors, playing all these parts. Man, it's just I can get over it. I can get over the white people and the other strange casting. I guess I can get over them speaking in English. That just took a little adjustment. I can get over the British accents. I think I can get over that. But man, that's weird to me. Anyway. Whatever. Let's see what else. Okay, the number 3 thing that I noticed in this category is when John. I think it was Peter actually. In this story, he said, when he was in a moment where I think he was kind of supposed to be summing up what Jesus' teaching was about, at least what he thought Jesus' teaching was about. He said he taught us to treat others the way that we want to be treated, you know? And that was really interesting to me because that is what I think that's the popular idea of what Jesus' teaching was kind of all about. If you want to boil it down, this is basically what he taught is let's treat each other the way that we want to be treated. And certainly that was a message of Jesus, but it wasn't revolutionary in the sense that compared to the other things that he taught. Now, maybe that kind of thinking had fallen out of favor a bit, but those ideas are in the Tanakh. They're in the Old Testament, you know, to love your neighbor as yourself. That is in the Old Testament. And so that wasn't like this radical new idea, oh my gosh, you know, that Jesus would really be like known for. It's like, have you heard of this guy who wants us to love each other like we want to be loved, you know? So I think that's kind of weird as that being a summary. But I mean, okay, I can accept, though, that Peter didn't get at that time, as none of the disciples did, what Jesus really came to do, what his mission was about, and really what the foundation and the core of his teaching was really about. They didn't get it. But what they were confused about did not lead them to this idea. What it led them to that we see in Scripture is really getting focused on the kingdom aspect of what Jesus was preaching in the wrong way. Because Jesus was talking about ushering in this new kingdom, this whole new role that he was going to be leading, that really all of humanity was going to be invited to be a part of. It's just a whole new way of humanity existing. You know, the kingdom of God. That's what he was ushering in. And they really viewed it as a political kingdom. They viewed it as this thing that Jesus was going to lead, kind of this revolution, and the Jewish people were going to be freed from the Roman Empire. They were going to have their own nation again that was free from any rule over them by another country. And, you know, they would argue among themselves about who would get to be his right-hand man and where people would sit at the table and, you know, and to have their, you know, the higher status and stuff. That's all that they were focused on, was this kind of like this political movement, or this, you know, that they thought Jesus was about to you know, kick off, you know. And so that, if anything, is what I think Peter at this point would have summarized as being Jesus' teaching, you know, what he was all about. This just smells more like what the common, you know, misinformed or willfully ignorant person thinks of as being what Jesus was all about. He certainly was about that, but I think as you read through the Gospels, and, you know, you can read them again and tell me what you think, but I think as I read the Gospels, I do not see that as like this main message that he had that would be like the one thing that people remembered if they forgot everything else, you know? So anyway, that was a kind of a strange choice. Let's see here. Oh, another thing I noticed, number 4 on this list, would be Mary's understanding of the resurrection. So we've got Mary, the mother of Jesus, which of course can be identified by her blue clothing. We all know that she wore blue because we've seen that on greeting cards for years. But no, I mean, the dialogue, you know, tips us off several times that this is the mother of Jesus. But she's talking about, like, don't you guys realize he's going to rise from death on the 3rd day? And I don't think that we see that in the Bible. We see a couple of Marys spending time with the disciples during this time period. We see Mary, the mother of Jesus, certainly at Golgotha while Jesus is being crucified. We see this Mary that's referred to as Mary, the mother of James. And some scholars have concluded that James is the half-brother of Jesus, and this Mary, is the mother of James, is also the mother of Jesus. But not all scholars agree on that. So, but let's assume for a moment that Mary is the mother of James. Well, in the biblical account, she brought spices to the tomb also. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, maybe we'll see it in the next episode, I don't know. But Mark 16:1 says, when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. They're talking about the body of Jesus. And this was a practice that was done to, it was kind of like an embalming type thing, where they would do this to keep the body from stinking as it decayed, you know? And so this was not a practice that was done to anticipate resurrection. It was a practice that was done to deal with the reality of death. And so if Mary, the mother of James, is Mary, the mother of Jesus, then she shouldn't in this story be anticipating resurrection. And if Mary, the mother of James, is not Mary, the mother of Jesus, then we really shouldn't be seeing Mary, the mother of Jesus, a whole lot right now in this story or going forward from here. She really kind of vanishes soon after the crucifixion and certainly the resurrection. I'm not sure if she's mentioned in Acts. I don't recall offhand, but I mean, she's really fades to the background big time. So what I'm wondering is if we're going to see, out of a desire to appeal to the large Catholic demographic, I'm wondering if we'll see a more prominent Mary than we should if we're trying to tell the story of the Bible, and also an elevated Mary who's kind of like the first one to understand Jesus and know what we're supposed to do and kind of the person they all look to. And, I wonder if she'll kind of be like this figure that they turn to for wisdom. It'll be interesting. And I also suspect that if they go that route to kind of appeal to the Catholic demographic, that we might see a more respectable Peter than he is as he's in the Bible. Because even after the resurrection of Jesus, certainly during this time, Peter was just screwing things up, and we see that. We see his cowardice here, but we see him screwing things up after this too. So it'll just be interesting to see how they handle Peter. The fifth thing I noticed is that not just Mary, but all the disciples in the show seemed to consider and even hope for Jesus' resurrection. Now, the Pharisees knew what Jesus meant. They knew he was claiming, they took him at face value when he said, that the Son of Man must rise, the stuff about this temple. I'm trying to remember if they heard him say rise. I know they heard him say about the temple, that you destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up. However, in the Bible, the disciples are depicted as not expecting resurrection, despite Jesus telling them in advance. They just kind of thick. They weren't getting it. Peter and John don't even seem to be looking for resurrection, certainly not hoping for one. It doesn't seem to be even like a possibility for them. When they examine the tomb in John chapter 20, verses 8 and 9, it's described this way. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. So they didn't get it yet. It just wasn't really on their radar. Number 6. Let's see here. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. During this time, the resurrection was not even like a single person concept. It was exclusively thought of as a future event for all people. In talking to the sister of Lazarus just before raising him from the dead, Jesus says in John 11, verses 23 and 24, he says, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." So, he was trying to say, your brother, I'm about to raise your brother from the dead, And she said, and she didn't get it. She didn't even it wasn't even on her radar. She was like, yeah, he's going to rise from the dead with the resurrection at the last. It was this future event that would happen to all people, And it is that. There is a resurrection event coming. But it wasn't even on the radar that like a single person could be raised from the dead. Now you could argue, as I think this episode kind of does, that since they saw Lazarus get raised from the dead, that maybe they would be willing to believe this idea that Jesus would, raise himself from the dead. But again, I think if we look at the text in John 20 verses 8 and 9, I don't think that was on their radar. It says they saw and then they believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. So. If you want more information about just kind of like the historical background and the evidences for the resurrection, I would recommend Dr. William Lane Craig. He's written extensively on the topic, so check out some of his books on that. William Lane Craig. He's also got a podcast called the Defenders podcast series, which you should be able to find if you use his name and search Defenders, and that's a good resource for what he's got to share as well. And then lastly, John comforts Peter at one point. Peter's feeling really guilty because he was not there. He was too cowardly to be there on Golgotha when Jesus was experiencing his last moments of suffering. And so he's understandably feeling guilty about that. And John says he understood our weakness. He loved us for it. Now, in this context, weakness is referring to sin. Peter was feeling guilty because he was not a good enough friend and a brave enough friend to spend those last moments with his friend Jesus as he was dying. So he was, he was seeing. I think we can replace that word weakness with sin in this context. That's what they were talking about. It was something he felt he needed to feel bad about. It wasn't just like my muscles weren't strong enough. It was a flaw in his character. It was sin. So, but John says to him, he understood our weakness, or sin, we would say. He loved us for it. Now that's interesting. Does God love us for our sin? Does he love us because of our sin? Does he love us? Boy, I just love how selfish they are and how they just think about themselves all the time. And I love how they just kind of disregard each other and don't look out for the good of each other. I just love that about them. No, what kind of a crazy, evil, messed up God would that be? No. What we see in the Bible is that he loves us despite our sin. He has this love for us that just fights beyond his disgust over our sin, and continues to faithfully love us despite our sin. That's a concept of God that retains his absolute perfection and also his is even more intense love for us than the love that John was potentially describing there. And that kind of leads me to one of the things that I really want to see in this show, and that is the gospel. And what I mean by that is the gospel, it's a broad term. It just means good news. But as it's used, as you look at the context of how it's used in the New Testament, it refers to the fact that Jesus as God himself was qualified to, it's the good news that Jesus as God himself was qualified to pay for our sins completely with his self-sacrifice, and by doing so reconcile us to God through belief in him, and then proving his identity by a physical, real resurrection. And that word reconcile is like a key word for me that I'm still waiting to see, because right now the impression that I get is that Jesus came, from this show, I get the impression that Jesus came and the main thing that he taught was let's love each other the way we want to be loved. He was this inspiring example, and he even kind of loved our sin too. There wasn't anything that wrong with us that really needed fixing. And then, man, wasn't it sad that he died? But he's going to rise from the dead to prove how he should be listened to, and that his message about loving each other should really be listened to, because he is the Messiah, and they don't really define that, but he is this kind of supernatural figure that we ought to be listening to. That was interesting too, that they said Messiah a lot. They didn't say Son of God. Certainly didn't say God, but really he was crucified because of his blasphemy, because he put himself on a status equal to God. When he was saying that he was the Son of God, in that culture, being the son of someone made you, their peer, their equal. You were going to be the inheritor of all that they had. And so by saying he was the son of God, even though it's not this literal biological, kind of son, what he was saying was, I am this unique figure and I have a status equal to God. And that's why he was crucified. So anyway, I want to see this idea of reconciliation. I want to see this recognition that there's something wrong with us, that we are, and as a result of our sin, we are separated from God, and we need rescuing from that condition. And I haven't seen that yet. It looks like he's going to rise from the dead, and like, wow, he really was this special person. We should listen to him. And because we saw this spectacular thing, we're going to dedicate our lives to loving each other. Now we'll really be serious because we saw these crazy special effects and we saw this guy rise from the dead and then fly up into the sky. So man, let's really be about love because we just saw that. That was crazy. I have trouble buying into that motivation. The motivation that's easier to understand from what radically changed these guys is that they were doubting him, and they were not expecting resurrection, and what changed them was seeing him rise from the dead and then understanding what he had done for them, because that's what the rest of the Bible is about. It's all about the gospel. It's about this reconciliation between humanity and God, and it's about this amazing hope that we have for the future as a result of that. We have the hope of spending eternity with a God who doesn't just kind of go, all right, well, you guys play together, try not to fight, But he fixes and redeems us and rescues us from that condition. And it's this amazing hope. And that I can see them, having this radical transformation and seeing this resurrection of Jesus, and that being something worth dying for getting that message out there. But just a message of let's just really try to make the world a better place by being loving to each other. That's a motivation that's harder for me to buy. Let's see here. Yeah, I mean, is it harmful what they're doing, in changing the message? I don't know. But I can see a scenario where someone who's watching this show and kind of believes that we don't really need fixing and Jesus' main message was love each other, that this could be just kind of an affirmation of that, and they could just kind of shrug at the supernatural stuff and say, okay, well, the producers decided to treat that as being real and that having really happened and stuff like that, But the show, if it perpetuates this idea that we really don't need to be reconciled with God, he just loves us and is content for us to go on sinning and being selfish and hurting ourselves and each other, I think that could potentially be harmful if this show in someone's mind, it kind of affirms that or enables further them hanging on to that kind of mindset. But I mean, that's going to depend on the individual and, how they're influenced by entertainment content and whatever. So I mean, I'm not scared of this show and I'm not angry about this show or anything like that. I think I want to applaud NBC because this, it got me into my Bible for a little extra time than I normally would be and gave me a reason to talk about this stuff. Hopefully he's giving you a reason to talk about this stuff too. It has good production values and performances. I mean, I think we ought to give this show our click and let NBC know, yes, I want more content like this, So I think that the best thing that this show has done so far for me and hopefully will continue to do for lots of people in the future is get us to talk about the New Testament and get us to open up our Bibles. That's awesome. And, it's not a bad production value. As far as production values, it's not a bad show to sit through. But what I want to see in the future of this show is the gospel being at the core of everything else, because that's what the rest of the New Testament is about. The gospel is at its core. It motivates everything. The gospel is rescue. It's not just an inspiring example. And if the series wants to call itself a continuation of the Bible, which it does, AD, the Bible continues, then I think it should reflect that and let its main characters be motivated by the gospel rather than dance around it or only vaguely touch on it now and then. All right, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I'm sure there's lots of different thoughts spinning around, and so I'd love to get yours. You can put those in the comments below, and yeah, what else? That's it. All right, I'm not editing this. I'm tired. This is the second time I've done this, and what is this video, like 30 minutes long? I've been doing this for 60 minutes. It takes a lot of energy to do this. But I'm done now. I hope that you'll leave your comments below. Like, share, subscribe if you want more content like this. And then I hope you'll go to ChristianGeekCentral.com and join us there as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. ChristianGeekCentral.com